Good evening. This is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee to discuss a number of issues, or at least one issue, actually. The motion put forward by the city manager to file a home rule petition to eliminate Chapter 17. So before we get into that, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Elliott.
Here.
Councilor Kennedy.
Here.
Councilor Martin. Here. Three present.
President, thank you, Mr. Clerk. So, as I mentioned or started to elaborate, this is about one of the city's stabilization funds, i.e., Chapter 17 of the Acts of '93. So, with that, Mr. Manager, a motion was made by Councilor Milanazzo, seconded by Councilor Martin, to send this to have a discussion. Makes a lot of sense on the particular issue. Just by way of history, I think it was a year ago that $2 million was taken to pay $2 million in net school spending from this particular account, so it has to be replenished. But before we get into that, if you want to give some remarks, let the record also reflect that Councilor Belanger, along with Councilor Mercier, Councilor Milanazzo, Councilor Leahy, and Councilor O'Rourke are in attendance. So with that, Mr. Manager, to you, we have presumably a presentation on this. So thank you, Mr. Manager. With your time.
Thank you, Mayor, and other members of the City Council. From the first day I started as city manager, I had this financial albatross around my neck known as net school spending. I know all of you went through the difficult times also, but as part of our fiscal year 15 budget, we promised that we would eliminate the net school spending deficit in the city of Lowell. And I committed to the City Council to draft a plan to eliminate the net school spending requirement. And we have arrived at that plan, and we are presenting that plan to you this evening. As a matter of fact, there's really two votes this evening that will result in the net school spending liability being completely eradicated. One is we're going from the free cash we have left over from 2014. We're asking the council to authorize a transfer of $1.4 million to the school system. And then we're also asking that the council authorize the filing of a home rule petition to collapse Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1992. Currently, there's approximately $2.2 million in that stabilization fund. The good news is the net school spending seems to be a daily evolving amount. We never really know the final figure until the Department of Education sends us that certification. But the more we move along, it's looking not as onerous as we originally thought it was going to be. However, we do still feel that the net school, Chapter 17, should be collapsed. And I will commit to this City Council that any money that is not expended from the Chapter 17 fund we will ask you to transfer that to the General Stabilization Fund and increase that stabilization fund to a record high. So what I'd like to do now is just to have my financial team give a brief presentation on the net school spending liability, what we plan to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Baldwin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to run through a number of slides here and give some information about the issue at hand and the reason why we're requesting the council move forward with this action, both for the edification of the council and for anyone watching at home. So the first slide here really encapsulates the crux of the issue, where the repeal of Chapter 17 is intended to address the net school spending liability, as the manager mentioned just a few moments ago. However, it's important for us to, when we're discussing the utilization of reserves, to take a look at the city's current reserve position as a whole. So this slide that you see on the screen here shows all of the city's reserves, including excess levy capacity, and it shows a historic view back to fiscal year 2001. So you'll see that the portion of the bars in green represents the Chapter 17 fund, which, as the mayor noted previously, 2 million of that was used to address the net school spending issue earlier in March of the previous fiscal year. However, there is still, we have 8.65 million in the general stabilization fund, a little under 200,000 in other special purpose stabilization funds, and just over $12 million in our excess levy capacity, which is the amount below the levy limit, which could be raised if needed. So looking back at the history of net school spending in Lowell, the city was only able to meet the net school spending requirement in 3 of the last 18 years. And most of that was due to monies that were received through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act era. So in fiscal year 2009, 12.6 million, fiscal year 2010, 5.8 million, and fiscal year 11, 4.3 million of era money were used to meet the net school spending deficit, the net school spending requirement, which after the era money was no longer available, the city again found itself in a difficult situation to meet the state required number. So the net school spending is a liability on our books, and it's important to remember that it's a deficit that will continue if we do not address it. Our financial advisors for Southwest, who assist the city when selling debt, have advised that the most prudent course of action is for us to eliminate the Chapter 17, to request that the legislature rescind the Chapter 17 and use that money to wipe out the net school spending debt. So through the 90s, the city was able to float within the allowable 5% threshold that the Department of Education allows. If communities exceed this grace period, they run the risk of losing Chapter 70 money, which in a community like Lowell that relies heavily on state aid would be detrimental. Last year, as we spoke about, the $2 million transfer from Chapter 17 set forth this requirement to pay back the $2 million within 1 year's time, which brings us to today. So while the city has a net school spending deficit, it's important for the subcommittee and councilors present to remember that while the city is in a deficit with net school spending, the school department is able to maintain any encumbered balances at the end of the year. If we're on even ground, the money would revert to free cash. So until then, at the end of each year, if there are purchase orders that are open in the school department, they're allowed to roll those forward. So this next slide provides an additional history of net school spending with the percent over and under that each year going back to education reform in fiscal year 1993 all the way up to fiscal 14, and as the manager mentioned before, those numbers are still being finalized, and we've been communicating with the business manager and the school department to get those final numbers to fully resolve this issue that has been an albatross. A little more about Chapter 17. It's from a time when Lowell's finances were in much worse shape than they are today. So while the control board that was also part of this happening in this same period was eliminated, the city retained the fund because it was the only source of reserves for a number of years. Today, however, as I mentioned before, the city has 8.6 million in general stabilization, several $100,000 in other special purpose stabilization funds, and there is that $12 million in excess levy capacity that is available. We also have, as the manager mentioned on the agenda tonight, the proposed new stabilization fund that will help mitigate future debt service for capital expenditures that would be in the amount of $955,000. So that would be an additional reserve that we're proposing this evening that the council approve. And also, the ratings agencies have recognized Lowell's dedication to building its reserves, and just a few months ago, when we were in the market, upgraded the financial management analysis score from good to strong, which was further verification of Lowell's good financial management. So that brings us to the recommendations that the manager is bringing forth before the subcommittee this evening. We are recommending that the council, the subcommittee recommend to the council that we move forward with the home rule petition to rescind Chapter 17 and the requirements to pay it back so that we can utilize the balance to once and for all eliminate the net school spending deficit. As I mentioned before, Standard & Poor's, the rating agency, does not acknowledge that the state-mandated Chapter 17 is a true reserve because of this requirement to pay it back. In that sense, it's not the same as a general stabilization fund or other types of liquid or cash reserves. So this will also help to advance one of the manager's pillars, which is a strong focus on education and fully funding the requirement to the Lowell school system. So I'll be happy to answer any questions from the subcommittee or any counselors.
Councilors, members, questions? Councilor Martin?
Thank you. So, Mr. Baldwin, the last page of your PowerPoint there, the phrase that's in bold about the school side surpluses, are we in that position now, or would we be, but for the deficit in net school spending?
Yes, that is correct, Counselor. And in this past year, fiscal 14, I believe the number was approximately 2.1 million in purchase orders that were rolled forward for the school department that, had we been on even ground with our net school spending requirement, would have fallen to free cash.
So I don't quite get that. So they have $2 million in unpaid bills?
No. It's open purchase orders. So the money has been encumbered for a certain purchase. The expense hasn't been paid out, so they're able to.
Or it could include unexpended salary balances to counselors. So the total sum of money that is now sitting in what is called the school suspense fund is $2.1 million from balances of June 30th, whether they be salaries or purchase orders, and the $1.4 million being recommended to go to them this evening, which must go to them because it was the charter school reimbursement. But essentially, they have $3.5 million in their own free cash, which the council has no jurisdiction over how they expend it. Once we flatten out and clear up this net school spending deficit, which I believe we have successfully, in the recommendation for the fiscal 15 budget, funded the school budget at the minimum foundation number. So this year's school budget met the minimum state requirement. We still have the deficit to deal with. And that will, this is the goal, this is what we can achieve. And next June 30th, if there are any unexpended balances, they would be able to come toward the general fund for free cash.
So as opposed to being rolled over for future expenses on that
Correct.
side of the budget?
That's correct.
Okay, so, but how, you say we've addressed, but we don't really know, right? We don't know until the conclusion of the fiscal year that you say we've solved the problem in the past, but going forward.
Well, the letter from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education should come to the mayor and the city by January or at least February. So the actual number of net school spending that is needed will be known, and it would be the manager's intent to have that all cleared up before June 30th, and we can start fiscal 16 on a clean slate.
So that letter will come for the year we're in?
Yes.
Right. Okay, I may have some others too, but I'm good for now, thank you.
further questions from members of the council? Councilor Mercier, then Councilor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Bob Haley. I'm just concerned on the page that says the past 2 fiscal years have been seen the city net school spending deficit balloon to over $4 million, and we're over $4 million, ballooning over. How much more over $4 million? Because it says that we're going to be reimbursing $3.5 million. So how does that? We're still in a deficit, wouldn't you think? How does that, you explain that?
The 4 million was a high water mark. It was mitigated by the recommendation this year to transfer $2 million from the Chapter 17 account to address $2 million of the $4.2 million then school deficit. That number is a moving target. At best information that the preparation of this document would be, the balance in the deficit is 2.2 million, the balance in Chapter 17 is 2.2 million, and that should wipe it out and also eliminate the payment of $2 million back into Chapter 17, which would be required. And as the manager said, if the numbers work so that that entire $2.2 million is not needed, it was his recommendation to the city council that that money also go into a reserve fund.
When you say reserve fund, we're not talking about the general fund. We're talking about the stabilization account.
Stabilization fund, yes.
Let me just say this. There has been a lot of talk about not having a reserve for emergencies, and it seemed like this was a reserve for emergencies, but actually, in truth, it isn't, right?
Correct, because it has to be paid back. The city has been able to create reserves for emergencies in the stabilization fund, and if worse came to worse, the excess levy capacity. There's been debt stabilization fund, there's been a pension reserve fund, so there have been multiple reserves. And the worst thing that you have here is, while Chapter 17 was sort of a forced reserve that you had to pay back, sitting on the other side was this huge liability. And the rating agencies know that's a liability. They don't look at the city as if they're rating their reserves. They understand they're clearing up a liability.
So if we have an emergency, we still have funds available to almost $12 million that would handle
Absolutely.
emergencies.
Absolutely.
So I want the public to understand this, and I think I may have you say this again, because there are a lot of people that tune in at 6:30, and they probably are not aware of this finance subcommittee, and this is very important, because I was a little skeptical too, because when you think on a larger scale and you think a pension fund for the government, and now you hear, oh, there's not going to be anything for retirement for those that retire in the future. Well, of course not, because they're taking out of that all the time for everything other than what the purpose is. And so people equated that with this vote tonight, and it has nothing to do with that. And so that's why I'm trying to clarify this, because when I vote, I have to be accountable for what I believe is in the best interest of the people, and I think that you're providing that, you're explaining that.
This really is the best course for this city to deal with both the most appropriate way to deal with the net school spending that unfortunately the city has fallen into. It was rescued in 2009, 10, and 11 by the use of the Federal American Recovery Act money, which did count toward net school spending, even though it was not local money, it was federal money. But that's how the city met its needs. When ARA dropped out of the revenue stream to the city, the net school spending deficit just grew and grew even greater. So it really is the most prudent fiscal and financially responsible thing the city council can do, is to address this deficit. And that's what the manager has tried to do with his submitted budget, and that's what he's doing with this recommendation.
I honestly believe you, but I have one more comment about net school spending, having seen that over the years. I firmly believe that we pay everything that we possibly can to the school department, but the state mandates that we do it at 100%. If we go over the 100%, we never get a credit for that, and that frosts me. And they let us know at like the very last minute, oh, you're only at 85%, and then when you don't meet the 100, they keep adding it over and adding it over. I think that's completely unbelievable. And then we should demand that they let us know periodically, like a bank statement. It's fiscal year 15, and it's the month of August. You have accumulated this amount towards the net. They should let us know in statements all the time. They demand of us, but yet they don't listen to what we have to say. And these are the things that I want to say. I think sometimes it's very unfair. And many years ago, things that were applicable to the net school spending only applied like for 3 years, and then they eliminated it. This is very wrong, because we do more than our share, but they don't count it anymore. So I just wanted to say that, sorry.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Leahy, then Councilor Kennedy.
Thank you. I have no problem with what we're doing with Chapter 17. I think, after talking to a few people and talking to Mr. Baldwin, and it seems like the prudent thing to do. I just want to make sure where we are with our cash reserves. So I had a couple of questions on that. So if we do we're going to do the 1.4 for the charter school reimbursement. And then isn't this, are we getting a credit of like, say, 900,000 for maintenance of effort, something like that, right? That's going towards that too? So then we're up to about 2.3. Where are we getting the extra 600 to get up to the 2.9? Was that, am I adding it up right? I took the 2.9, I took out the 1.4. And
Well,
I know there's
I don't
something
think you can
about,
start with the 2.9 figure. What we're estimating right now, in the preparation for this vote, what we're estimating the net school spending deficit to be. Now, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, this could change. I hope things are looking better. It could be less.
I mean,
That's-
I've talked, I know we're pretty close, we're
Right.
technically there, so.
But what we do in preparation for this vote, we anticipate the deficit to be around $3.6 million. So that if we take 1.4 from free cash, transfer it to the school department, that brings it down to 2.2. And then if we take 2.2 from the Chapter 17 stabilization fund, collapse it, then we have the 2.2 to pay the remainder of the net school spending deficit. And like I said, that remaining, of that remaining 2.2, if it's less than 2.2, we anticipate it's not going to be more. If it's less than 2.2, whatever below 2.2 is I'm going to ask you to transfer it to the general stabilization fund and increase that even more. That, plus the fact that the free cash vote that we're asking to be done tonight is to set up another stabilization fund for debt service for capital projects of $900,000. So that's an additional reserve. So I think when everything is said and done, if after all of this is done, we're still going to have reserves totaling about, I would say, $11 to $12 million.
Okay.
The great irony is the $1.4 million, because it's state money, doesn't count toward reducing the deficit. It would, if we don't appropriate it to the schools, it would actually increase the net school spending deficit. Right. So, and that's where the manager had the number 3.6, as high as 3.6, if the 1.4 is not transferred to schools.
All right. My main concern with all the votes tonight is, over the last couple of years, we worked really hard with the past administration to send a message that we want roads and bridges fixed. And when you took over, we've had some bad luck with bridges, but roads were our main goal. And we want to make sure we're still on track. And I know we're going down a little bit in our reserves. They're not going to be quite as high as they actually were maybe, but we are taking care of some liabilities. But I just want to make sure that we're still in good shape we're supposed to be taking a good chunk of money out next year to fix our roads and sidewalks and things like that. So I want to make sure, I had us coming in closer to 11 million of free cash, but than 12, but I mean, it's still, I just want to make sure that this council works so hard to direct our focus on roads and bridges and sidewalks, that we want to make sure we're still in that position for the next spring and summer cycle. So, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Healy, just so that, I guess it's probably somewhat technical, but what you're really asking the city council to do is to petition the state legislature to repeal Chapter 17.
That's absolutely the correct summary, Councilor.
And Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1992 comes from a time when the city was in poor fiscal shape, and the reason for Chapter 17 really, I assume at the time, was to ensure that there would be sufficient money to fund the school department going forward at that time. Is that?
That's certainly a reasonable estimate. It was a time when the city had virtually no reserves, so this was a mandated, refundable reserve, I guess.
Okay. And so here we are, 20-something years later, and the situation is quite different, and this is something that really is an impediment to us going forward as we go forward. Okay, thank you.
Further questions from other members? I think this makes some sense for a couple of reasons, because we've been carrying this liability, and not only do we have 11 plus in reserves, what's also considered as part of the city's reserves are the excess levy capacity, which is remaining constant of, is it 11, 12 million? So, I mean, in total, if you're looking at the hard reserves, hard cash, if you will, that's accessible to the city in the event that we do need it, and in my opinion, unless it's an incredible, crazy emergency, when, we're going to keep those reserves because it does show fiscal strength. Carrying this liability doesn't make any sense. Chapter 17 was set up back in '93 when the city overestimated its revenues. It had no ability to raise revenue, i.e. taxes, so we had to, the city had to bond an operating deficit, which is absolutely unheard of. So I think that for well over 20 years, the city has grown financially. The stability of our growth and our reserves and our finances has, should show the legislature who created this act, the city's in very good shape. We have a strong rating from bond agencies. There's not a need for this stabilization. There are ample reserves in the event that there is some unforeseen emergency, and we've had emergencies in the last 20 years. And we have to get rid of this net school spending deficit. That's the bottom line. That we can either use these reserves, get rid of this stabilization that's not necessary. We can use other reserves, or you can raise taxes. There's no easy answer to this, to get rid of this liability, this problem that we have on the school side. And I agree with Council Mercia. The city, the school has sufficient funding, and it's, we have to contribute a certain amount. I have to tell you, I think the formula needs to be changed a little bit, where, we're constantly behind the 8 ball, always trying to raise enough revenue in addition to what we have on the city side. And I think the legislature needs to take a look at it, so we're not constantly chasing, funding to get back. In any event, so I think it makes sense, and I just wanted to make those comments. Council Martin, did you have some other questions?
I think it's important to ask some of these again at the council meeting. But so we're confident that the bond rating agencies at Department of Revenue not be critical of this plan. We've been in touch with them.
As a matter of fact, First Southwest, who was our financial advisor, we previously gave you a communication from them, as they are the ones who recommend that we collapse Chapter 17. This is their recommendation to deal with the issue.
Right, but they're not DOR. They're not.
No, but they certainly know the lending and the criteria that DOR relies on, and they're making this recommendation to us.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Council Kennedy.
We're probably getting ready to wrap it up, and I realize this is before the full council, but I would move that the Finance Committee recommend to the full city council that it petition the state legislature to repeal Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1992.
Motion by Councilor Kennedy to... Second by Councilor Martin to proceed with the repeal of Chapter 17. Roll call.
Mayor Elliott.
Yes.
Counsel Kennedy.
Yes.
Counsel Martin.
Yes.
That's 3 yeas.
Yeas. Thank you, Mr. Manager, and your financial team, members of the City Council.
Mr. Chairman,
We
I move
appreciate it. We'll bring this recommendation to the full City Council. Motion to adjourn by Councilor Kennedy, second by Councilor Martin. All those in favor signify by saying aye, and the opposed, motion carries. This meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, because...